Today we are going to be talking about mastering risk in the age of unstoppable innovation. If we look at the rise of AI, if we look at the industry that I'm predominantly in, which is privacy, there is so much that's happening all the time. It is just a constant stream of regulations. It is a constant stream of innovations. It's technology, it's tools, and it's very hard to kind of keep up with this. And when we are in the space of managing risk, we're also managing kind of opportunities. And the idea is we need to be able to manage that risk in order to take advantage of opportunities, but also keep up with it. And there is so much. When I say so much, I'm starting to talk about different legislations and things and regulations. So, for example, we have things like POPIA, we have GDPR, we've got OHSA, we've got PEA, we've got TSSA, we've got CCPA, we've got codes of conduct, we've got OBC, we've got EPA, we've got BCA, we've got Regulation 941, we've got GPSR, we've got PIPEDA, we've got e-privacy, and this is just going on and on and on. And the acronyms just continue. If you're battling with any of these, ask your kids, they'll tell you. But this is what we want to get away from, and I want everyone to kind of breathe, focus, and let's get into a 5-step program for looking into how to manage risk and all of that in this kind of insane world that we have right now. So my name's Ross. I'm going to be taking you through this. My journey into the governance space was quite an interesting one, and I think perhaps a little bit of a different one. I started out in the software company space, but I was on the call desk. So I was giving support to people on the phone, fixing printers, things like that in IT. I then moved into networking and the technical side of things, studied programming, went into programming, loved it in college, and absolutely despised it when I got into practice and actually working in the real world. And that kind of took me into the space of what's now known as DevOps. So somewhere between software and the technical side of things and how we implement controls and things like that. From there, my journey went more into management, looking after these different environments. And I kind of became a bridge between technical and legal. And that's kind of where my governance side comes in. I started working for multiple auditing firms and governance software companies. And I've spent the last 15 years or so working in the tech governance space. How do we comply? How do we stay up to date? And how do we really put these legal requirements into our businesses and how we need to run things? And also how you take things on a practical sense and take it back to legal, because lawyers can sometimes be a little impractical with what needs to go into play. So that's been my space for a while. And I'm going to take you through how I handle a lot of these situations. Now, this is going to be tinged in the privacy and cybersecurity space, but I want you to take the overarching view that this is governance. These approaches that I'm going to speak to you about can come in provincially, they can come in on different countries that you're working on projects. It can come in on any regulations, things like that. So these methods that I'm going to go through are pretty much applicable across the board for fast-moving targets and risk. So the first step of this entire process that I like is making sense of everything. And the first thing we want to do is really take a pragmatic approach to how we're looking at things. And when I say that, there's a very defined structure to looking at what you need to comply with, and what rules are out there and what laws are out there. So I have a little bit of a pyramid that I use, which talks about the countries that you deal in, the laws that are there, the obligations that you have to look after, and then the deltas between all these obligations and laws and countries. So how do you kind of start in this space and how do you find all of this out? First up is the countries. Now, this can be countries, this can also be provinces, because provinces have different rules and regulations, and you can bring those in. In the US, you've got states that have different rules and regulations that you bring into play. We particularly see that in the privacy space, where almost every state has its own law. There's nothing federal that we can deal with. So the first stop is to look at the countries, the provinces, the areas that you're operating in, and identify what the laws are there. What are the regulations? What are the codes of conduct and rules that you have to play by? And that you identify a lot of those from speaking to the likes of professional bodies, regulatory bodies, law firms, and those kind of approaches. I work a lot with professional bodies in trying to get information out. So in my world, it's the IAPP, International Association of Privacy Professionals, and you can gather a lot of the rules that you want from that. From those rules, where you now have this understanding of what rules are out there, what the laws are, you can start extracting those obligations that you need to do. And you can start doing this by just reading through the laws, summarizing them, and pulling out things that you have to do in accordance with the law. But often what we will do here is speak to lawyers, speak to consultancies, and get a bit more of a view in there. So speak to folks that have that domain expertise to get those obligations we need to comply with. And then the last part of this pragmatic approach is looking at the deltas. And this is where you kind of start a spreadsheet. You've got the countries, you've got the laws, you've got the different obligations. You want to look at what the differences are in those obligations. So what is the difference in Maryland from California? What is the difference between BC and Ontario? What are the differences in obligations in that little gap that we have to cross in order to make sure that we comply with it? Now, previously, this was a very challenging thing and having to go to different firms and things like that. But there's a great way to start this nowadays, and that is to use AI. AI is a fantastic thing. Particularly the paid for tools, I use Claude in particular and use its Opus model. It is very good at research and finding information around laws, regulations, things like that. There's also systems like Perplexity that are built for research. And you can get a lot of this information from these systems and then validate them with lawyers, which is great. When I do say use AI, though, I will put the little caveat on the slide and say, please use it responsibly. And we'll go into that as the rest of this presentation goes through. Now, how all of this plays out, I'm going to take you through a little bit of a case study. And this was a company that I had dealt with. And it's how we deal with it across different jurisdictions and things like that. So this example is pretty much around a hospitality company. They are a software company that would provide tools to hotels. And we had a whole bunch of things out there. And this was a very complicated situation with different regions. We needed to find out those countries, those obligations, those deltas that we needed to deal with. So we started off building up a bit of a spreadsheet and looking at where all these hotel chains were, what countries were they in. And we came up with a very long list of these things, which was very challenging because now you're suddenly seeing about 14, 15 countries on the list and all the regulations within them. But we mapped them out. We mapped out what they were going to do for us and what their requirements were. And we started having those there. The next part that we had to do, because this was a hotel chain, there were individuals involved as well. So that brings in the privacy legislation side of things. And we had to look at, okay, where are the guests for the hotels coming from? Okay, they are from Europe predominantly. They are from Canada. They are from the US. So we could add those as the regions that we needed to look at. So we started building this entire footprint of the hotel chains, the hotel clients, and where the software would be. It was looking at the individuals involved. It was looking at the guests in the hotels. Where were they residents? We were looking at the suppliers, the clients, the vendors that were being used, and mapped out this whole space. Now, practically, when you get into these things, like I said, we're dealing with 14 countries. There's a huge number of laws that you need to look into. So how do you filter this down? What we did here was we very much took a risk-based approach and looked at how big the markets were in each section. and where the requirements came in from the clients. So the hotels, the chains were predominantly based in Europe, in the US, in the Caribbean, and there was a chain in Australia that was using this. Now, the US was a very large market for the client, and Europe was a huge market, and a lot of their contracts with the hotels maintained that they had to keep the standards of Europe in mind. So that being in contracts was the first thing that said to us, okay, European law is probably our big one that we're going to look at. Stick to that one. Headquarters was in Canada. So, okay, let's look at Canadian law, bring that in as our second option. And our third one, the third most important out of everything, was the US law side of things. When we looked at the Caribbean, we looked at South America, the split and percentage of what happened there was a lot smaller. So 10%, 5%, 8%. So we kept those kind of out of the loop for now, and we focused our efforts on those big three. The other big part about the European law is it's stricter, and that's generally where I would start as well, is look at the strictest regulations you have to comply with and go there first. Because if you comply with the strictest, chances are you're complying with a lot of the less strict laws already because you overlap a lot of what would need to be done. Then it's where the deltas come in saying, okay, well, we've complied with Canada, we've complied with the EU. What needs to be done for the US? Now, most things are covered, but there's something about the sale of information in the US and California. We've got to add that in. So let's quickly do that. And that was one component that we did there. And we worked in this process of elimination that worked really, really well. And through the US, Canada, Europe, we had complied with most of the regulations in other regions as well, which was great. And it kind of cascaded down and it became a lot easier than we thought it would be. The initial program to comply with the European law was about 18 months, and then we were reducing that rapidly for the other regions, like 2 months for Canada, 1 month for the US to get compliance in. And that's kind of how this plays out with the model of looking at it pragmatically. Right. So then let's go into step two. The first part of this, that step one, gave us visibility now, what the laws are and things like that. Now we need to build policy that we can work on. So be it AI law, be it different regulations, we want to build a policy. Think of it as building policies around things moving quickly. How do you do it? You do this by making principled policy. So it's not necessarily that you're going to granular detail, but you're more looking at the spirit of things you're trying to do. So you want to keep it high level. And I'll get into how that kind of plays out in a couple of slides. Before I get to that part, I do want to dispel a few myths about how policies come together and what policies should and shouldn't be, and so on. So first up, your policies do not have to be long. What's long, what's multiple sheets, loads of sheets, and can be really stinky to go through? Toilet paper. Don't make your policies toilet paper. You want to have your policies be to the point. You want them to be able to apply to your business and keep them there. So don't make them too long. Make them applicable. Keep it to good points. If you're in the space of engineering and all of that already, I think you're well aware of how to keep things to very good detail. Keep that in your policies as well. Next up, they don't have to be filled with legalese. Yes, you may have contracts that have to be in place that have to be legal and legalese and very careful wording, but your policies can be plain English. Plain English is better for getting people to actually read policies and follow them. You can have very, very short policies that are very to the point that work so well because you would say things like, you are responsible for doing this, we are responsible for doing that. And it makes it so clear to everyone involved, as opposed to party A, party B, the company, this holding company, et cetera, et cetera. It gets very confusing for people reading it. And the thing about policies, we want people to read them. And if you want people to read them, they also shouldn't be boring. Policies, you should have these back-end policies that you can fall onto, but you can make them into an interesting consumable way. So things like infographics where you can give a one pager out that displays very well with pictures what you can and can't do. I've seen some fantastic policies in that space. I've seen policies that are developed in a flow chart. Like, if you do this, then this is going to happen, then we will do that. And it explains it really, really well to people. So you want to look at bringing that in. And a lot of what I do, and I've worked with, there's a fantastic um, Swiss lawyer named David Rosenthal, and he's put out some really great guidance on building agile policies around AI, things like that. And the next part that I'm going to get into is based a little bit on his work. So it's really, really good to go through. But now, to be agile in these policies where you've got stuff that is changing on such a rapid basis, and I'm going to use AI as the prime example here, where we are currently with all these tools coming out. This is where we want to be very, very agile and be able to move well in our policies. So first up, you want to look at the things that are set in stone. So even though there's a lot of movement around AI and things are up in the air and crazy, and we may not know what we want to put in our policies, there are going to be certain things that we know need to be in the policy. Our non-negotiables, how many people are allowed to use this? Who is this tool for? Who are these sets of tools for? What's the audience? Things that we would have in our normal policies, we would still keep in there. So these are things that we can know. Permissions, compliance, what are the reporting requirements, things like that. Keep those in there. Next up, we're going to get into new uses. And this is where it starts getting interesting and very agile in the approach. So you want to have a section that says, if you discover new uses, these are the guidelines you might want to follow and how you can contact for more, or who you can contact for more information. So things like, if you find a new tool that serves a purpose for your department, please don't just purchase it, reach out to us. Have clauses like that in your policy. What are the new uses? Then from there, look at the current uses of AI or whatever. This is where David Rosenthal's model comes out really, really well, and talking to having like infographics and things like that. He does a kind of matrix that goes across the top of what types of data can be used in AI. And down the side, he talks about what tools you can use. And what the little grid does is says, for this tool, you can put these types of data in it. And again, like I said, with principled policies, you don't necessarily want to name the tool, because in the case of AI or something like that, we may change tools very rapidly. So you might be using Fathom for your note-taking today. You might switch over to Zoom for your note-taking tomorrow. So instead of naming the tool as Fathom, put it in as note takers. So that means you don't have to update your policy as frequently, because you are covering whatever the spirit of it would be, and it can stay the same. You've got the same rules, whether it's Zoom or Fathom, you can put that XYZ data. So it may be that you split the data into company confidential information, client information, information about vendors, information about compliance, information about reporting and audits. And you can put little checks next to it. Okay, Fathom, don't put any audit data, don't put any personal data, but you can put meeting data and you can put client information in there. When it comes to your marketing, you can only put publicly accessible information in it, no personal information. Don't do anything like that with AI. When it comes to making decisions about credit checks, you may put financial information in, but don't put other personal information in. And you kind of build out this great matrix that people can see at a glance, and that allows you to be very agile. You can also reference outside of a policy. If it does update frequently, you can have a table outside a policy that people can refer to. There's so many ways of doing it, but you want to talk about what can you use these tools for. And then the last part ties into kind of the little blue section here. What about new uses? Is where to find out more. If people don't know where to go to find out more, and a policy doesn't cover what they're trying to get to and what sort of achievement they want to make with a tool or something like that, or regulation, they will go under the radar. And that's where we start calling things shadow processes, shadow IT, shadow AI. It's where the business doesn't know what someone is doing individually, and it's kind of diverted away from policy. And you want to avoid that. And to avoid that, let people contact you. If there's a new use, this is the person you should reach out to. Have a question, have a chat, and you can really work around that. But I'll jump into that because that's also a later step in the policy or in the process that I have. So yeah, keep it in there. Constantly changing tools. You want to have something that can be flexible and move around. Now, once you've got these policies in place and you've written them and you've got them going, the next trick is to get the policies to actually stick with people. It doesn't help writing all these policies and having these fantastic processes and policies out there, but no one reads them and no one complies with them. And for compliance, if you're in the compliance space, part of that role, a very big part of that role, is training. So you need to be able to train people. The trick where most companies fail horribly in this space of training folks is they train people as though they're compliance people. You are not training compliance people unless you have a compliance department that you're training. That's a different story. But you want to train people as they are in the roles that they're in. Because what happens when you train general staff as compliance officers? There's a very specific thing that comes through, and that is a dramatic reduction in voluntary experiential learning. And I go through this because they're going to look at what you're teaching them and they're going to call it absolute drivel, and they are going to absolutely fall asleep in this space. You don't want that happening when people are looking at your policies. So when you want to bring these policies in, when you want to train them, how do you do that to actually make it interesting? There are a few very key places you need to go, much like your policies and keeping it to the point. You need to do that with your training. So the first side of your training that you do on policies must really be relatable. Policies for anyone that, and please take this for any training as well, if you're providing training to people, it should be relatable to their day-to-day. So it must be things that someone does in their role. We see it a lot in the privacy training side of things, where someone will train a person on the front line, on the call desk or something, on a piece of privacy law that only the privacy office needs to worry about. That never sticks with the person on the call desk. But if you train privacy on the call desk about what happens when a phone call comes in and someone requests access to their data, where does it need to go? And you train on that with what happens in a day-to-day basis, that sticks a lot more. So look at the department someone's in, look at how you are dealing with people, and bring that training to be absolutely related to what they do. Now, just on that kind of relationship piece and the relatable to the individuals, one of the approaches that you can take really well in this training space is a kind of train the trainer approach to things. So where you could, and then this is more for your larger company. So if you are in a larger consultancy or agency or something like that, or firm, one of the ways we see it really effectively done is having a bit of a hub and spokes model from compliance. So you have whoever's accountable for the compliance to a particular regulation, be it health and safety or anything like that. And the spokes are all champions in the different teams. So you may have a champion for compliance in the project office, and a champion for compliance in health and safety, and a champion for compliance in manufacturing. And you have these different teams with someone there, and you train that leader. That leader then goes and trains the specific team on the day-to-day and where things can be raised and brought in, and they bring that information to the accountable side. Think about it as accountable in the center, responsible around the sides, and then people supporting it from the outside. You can also look at things like RACI models, RACI or RASCI, are great ways of building out the space as to who needs to get the training, who is responsible, who's accountable, who's informed, who's consulted, who's supported. Great way to go about it. But yes, keep it relatable. Next, you want to do the training on repeatable things that happen. Training on compliance things that might happen once a year or something like that gets very difficult to make it stick. And it's a lot more noise that someone receives than they may need in their department or in their day-to-day work. So you want to look at the processes that are repeatable. It's not fringe cases that must be trained on. That keeps it very much to the point and relevant to the person that you're busy training. And coupled with that, to try and keep that relevance and kind of keep that load off someone, is you want to look at trying to automate a process or automate a compliance exercise or a policy. I come from a little bit of an internal audit background and from some of my time in that space. And you talk about maturity levels around policies, where the first maturity level is just having a policy. The second maturity level is having a policy being repeatable. And the third maturity level is that automation. And what this means is taking away the human element of someone having to focus and think and remember to comply with something, and instead have that compliance be automated. And a great example of this, and a very simple example of this that everyone who is on an online system here would have experienced, is passwords. So you can have it in your policy that someone needs a password that is 10 characters long. It needs a set of numbers, letters, uppercase, lowercase, special characters, bit of a DNA sample, some hair, things like that to make it complex enough. It's great to put that in your policy. People are not necessarily going to remember that these are all the things they have to do if you don't enforce that with some sort of automation. So the automation point is, you've got it in your policy for that, but have your systems that you're using, like your IT systems, only be able to support passwords with all these wild and wonderful things in them. And then it takes that thinking away from the person, or the concentration that they have to remember this part of the policy, and they can focus on the parts that they do have to remember and do manually. Just as a little side note, I do a lot of work in cybersecurity as well. On the password side, quick hint, quick trick. If you want a good password, think of using passphrases. Take 4 words around you and string them together with a symbol in between each one. Much easier for a human to remember, much harder for a computer to guess. Thank me later. Yes, get your passwords in place. Back to the process here. Once you've got it automated, the next thing you want, and the last part of this puzzle, is you want to be really strategic about your training. And it's not strategic in that it is strategic training that you're giving. It's that you want to link your training to their strategy that they're trying to achieve. And this goes for also any training, even if you're working with vendors or other outside project people. If you relate your training and your exercises and your processes to something that is of a strategic goal of theirs, it sticks so much better. So things like building your policies, and when you're training someone, how is this going to make their life easier? How is this going to assist their compliance? How is it going to relate to their goals and their KPIs? If they've got performance measures that they're measured on in the company, if your exercises and your policies don't relate to their performance, it's not going to be top of mind for them to look at. If it does relate to their KPIs, or it does relate to OKRs or project milestones or something like that, there's a lot more buy-in that someone's going to be paying attention to it. So you want to be that strategic component related to someone's role. Bring it into how this makes their life easier. Bring it into, this is how it's going to help your goals, and you'll stick a lot more. Great. So this is our little space around making the policies that stick. I want to take us into a deeper dive now on what I was talking about with accessible processes. And this ties in, if you'll remember, to our little rocket ship. it is that last component of where to find out more that becomes very, very crucial here. I spoke about shadow IT, shadow AI, shadow processes. So to give you a little bit more on what that means, really, I said where it's someone that might go off script and get their own tools. How we see that play out in IT is perhaps someone wants a very cool transcription app. They've got YouTube videos they watch or training videos or something. They want to have a transcription so they can read, or they want captions or something like that. What can they put in place? What does the company have? Oh no, we don't have anything for that. Instead of going through the proper channels, because it takes a long time, this person just goes and buys something with a credit card, signs up for $10 a month, and then just puts in a requisition at the end of the month or an expense claim and gets the money back. That tool that they use for this transcription is no longer managed by the company. You don't know what's being put in there. Don't know how it's being managed. Is it secure? The same applies to vendors. You can have vendors where someone just rolls up a vendor and works with them, but they've never been looked at as to whether they're a good vendor or something along those lines. And to prevent people going these routes of kind of freelancing and cowboying and getting their own systems and stuff in place that no one knows or can manage, you need to be accessible. You need to be able to assess quickly. You need to be able to put this out there. So if we think of AI tools where it's making our lives so much easier, I use AI a lot, but I need to know who in my team is using what and why and what's being put into it. You need to manage that. But we need to respond quickly too, which kind of conflicts with each other. So how do we look at that? The trick here is to be really quick and then slow down. So I spoke in those policies, you've got to have someone who can be contacted for compliance. How can they be reached? How can someone put in a request for a new use under the policy? You need to have that channel for receiving. You need to be able to bring that in. And you bring that in so that you can very quickly assess. You can do some risk assessment. You want to be sure that whatever tool you might be using has got it, it's okay for the volume of data you might want to put into it. It's been assessed for accuracy on calculations and things like that. You want to look at how critical it is for the organization or the team. If it's low risk, you can give a very good answer very quickly. If it's high risk, you may need to be assessing for more. Look at the functions that the tool is going to do. Look at these things on a case-by-case basis. And then your big trick, respond quickly. Don't leave people hanging. Rather give them a no than say, we'll get back to you. You wait 2 months to do an assessment and they start using it anyway. You want to say to someone and give them a response here and now and why. It could be a yes, you may use this, it's low risk, we don't see any issue, carry on. Or it can be a in the interim, go for it, but don't put any personal information in it. Don't rely on it for any calculations about that could relate to safety or something like that. Don't rely on it to make decisions that'll have a legal impact. Rather, just use it for lighter things if it's a language model or something like that. But respond quickly. Get those risks identified nicely. Get out to them, respond quickly, and then follow your normal due diligence processes, deep dives, which I hope everyone has, to look at whether a tool should be used, shouldn't be used, if there's concerns about risks on data, safety, transparency, human rights for privacy, things like that. You need to look into that. Do your full due diligence. But this is the cycle I would follow when you want to be agile. It's that key is the assess and respond. Now, next question, which is normally what comes out of here, is kind of how do you do that assessment? It's easy to get the receiving end. It's easy to respond. Normal to do our deep dive and our usual assessment. How do we assess quickly? I want to bring forward one of the really, really excellent tools that gets used in software development. And that is threat assessment. Software, security, IT, threat assessment has been used for many, many years. And it is such a great tool that you can apply outside of that space. So in the tech industry, there's kind of three main things that I use in privacy and security. That's Stride, that's a security threat model. It's Plot for AI, which is great for AI tools, and I'll get into that into quite an example there. And Linden, which is on the privacy of individuals' information. So if you happen to be working on anything where you're collecting data of individuals, people who might be at a site, sign-ins, things like that, privacy rules come into play, and we can look at how to do a threat assessment. Now, threat modeling is different to kind of the big risk assessments, where risk assessments, you're going in and it's pages, it's months, it's working through every eventuality that could happen. Your threat modeling is there for, at say, the start of a process to be, okay, how do we rapidly identify the risk that we're going to need to deal with? And what are our remediations there that we should have on the roadmap? Now, I'm going to dive into Linden first, the privacy one. And Linden is an acronym for various different topics. So we talk about linking, we talk about identifying, non-repudiation, which is an example I'll get into. We talk about detecting, data disclosure, unawareness and unintervenability, non-compliance. And this spells out Linden. And this here is categories that you should think about in order to pull out risks. These are the main categories in terms of personal information where you'd have risks. Now, talking about non-repudiation, to walk you through how one of these would happen, is Linden Plot for AI is basically a card game. And you would get different folks from different teams or departments into a room. You sit down for an hour and a half with the deck of cards, and you go through them and you answer yes or no and get answers from the cards. This particular card here is non-repudiation of service usage. And that's a very fancy way of saying, can someone tell that a user is using a system from the outside? And a good example of this is those little password reset forms. If you forget your password for a website, on the security sense, you always want it to be, you want to be able to be sure that someone is who they say they are. That's where we have non-repudiation. If you have a tool that's resetting a password and someone logs in now, say it's a tool that could have very interesting consequences for an individual. Say, think back to the Ashley Madison scandal and that kind of thing. You could go to a website, say, I forgot my password, and it gives you a prompt to put in your email address. You type in your email address and you hit reset my password. There's kind of two ways it might go. The good way in terms of privacy and being able to say, well, you don't know if this is someone that's a user, is the response that's shown on screen would be, if this user exists in our system, we will send them an email with password reset instructions. You have no idea if that email address you just put in is actually a user or not. There's plausible deniability there. You don't know that. That's protecting privacy. The flip side of this is one of those fields for forget password. You put an email address in, you hit reset password, and it goes, oh, no user exists with this email address. Oh, now you know that person's not a user there. You put in another email address and you say reset, and it says, we've sent you a password reset. You can be sure that that second email address is now a user of that service, and that's a bit of a breach of privacy there, particularly if it's a dodgy service or something like that. So that's how this risk analysis and threat model happens on a very quick basis, where you go through these questions on the card. It gives you guidances that you can go through and you can answer it. Now, with the AI side of things, we have Plot for AI, which is the privacy library of threats for artificial intelligence. Quite a mouthful. Plot for AI is a bit better and easier. These also have a whole series of categories. And if you're implementing any sort of AI tools in your practice, I highly recommend getting the Plot for AI deck. They are free. You can look it up. You can Google it. You can download the decks, print them out yourself. But it gives you a lot of the questions you need to be asking about AI tools that you put in place. So what is the accountability that we have? Do we have data governance? What's the transparency around things? Do we have privacy and data protection? What cybersecurity do we need? And you go through these cards with that group that you've gathered in a room. It takes you about an hour and a half to get through it, and you come out with a great risk register of what you need to be concerned about. Plot for AI works that you ask the questions on the top of the card. If your answer is yes or maybe, you flip it over and it tells you what you should be doing. Very, very great tool. Now, I bring these two very specific privacy and tech and IT models up because there is nothing stopping you within your own compliance regimes from building a threat model like this. Putting the cards together, it's very easy. We've done this for other industries too, where you work through these assessments in cards, you build your own, and for health and safety, you could have a threat model that goes through things very quickly. For manufacturing, you can do this. For um, construction, things like that. You can build your own threat assessments for any risks that you might bring out. So I encourage you to go and take a look at these different assessments, see what's out there, look through Plot for AI. It's a very simple one to look at and see how you can apply it to your compliance. If your regulation that you're busy racing is moving from a different side and from a different regulatory body than what I'm coming to you at. So this would help. I hope this all helps. And out of these 5 steps, and we started with an exercise, and I hope you can still breathe. And maybe this is making things a little easier on the agile side. To give you a quick little summary about things and how we went through it, the first step we had, remember that triangle that I had? It's looking at that pragmatic approach. What are the countries, the provinces, the regulatory bodies you have to comply with? What are the obligations that come from them? What are the deltas that you need to look at? How do you map them out? Next up is looking at your informed policies. So once you've got that visibility, building your policies out, having that little rocket ship with the 4 different sections in it, building those policies out, and then training people on that. And doing that in a targeted way, making it make sense for people that are learning it, give them the awareness of it. Next up, you want to have those accessible processes. How does someone reach you if you're in charge of compliance to help put a new thing in place, put new tools in, avoid that shadow side of things happening, be accessible. And then lastly, do the threat assessment so you can respond quickly to someone and say, yes, we've done a quick threat assessment. It's low risk. Go ahead with this tool. We'll get back to you if it's no later. Or no, we've looked at this. This is a horrific tool. You cannot use this at all. Do not do it. We'll look at an alternative. Have that response system there. So in short, the software world's been racing the clock for decades. So we have for ages been working on deadlines for implementations, things like that. These fast regulations, nothing really new for the software space. And I really think it's time that a lot of what we've been doing in software and agile for many years now makes it to other practices and others get that benefit of being agile and bringing it to the fore there. And with that, I say thank you very much. If you want to find out more about this kind of compliance stuff, I've got a blog, things like that. Scan here and by all means, reach out.